A very warm welcome to everybody again for, believe it or not, for week 9, Hamish, is that right?
Week 9, yes.
Week 9 of Survive to Thrive. It's the weekly webinar series by New Zealand's exporters for New Zealand's exporters, as together we navigate our way through this situation and hopefully towards a brighter outlook for ourselves and our businesses, for our communities and of course for our country. We're delighted to be joined again by some amazing guests from right across the world to help us unpack today's topic. Because if you've been on the journey with us over the past couple of months now, what you'll know is that we're trying to bring together every week this sort of perspective on what's going on out there right here and right now that is very useful and insightful for the wider exporting community to understand and to discuss. And again, if you've been with us over the last 2 weeks, you'll know that following the formal session that we have up front with our panelists as well, there's also an opportunity for you, the audience today, to get together with other audience members for half an hour after the session and join us in the after party when we get a chance to talk together and to discuss between ourselves some of the things that are on your mind as well. So over the next 60 minutes, we're going to be focusing on the topic of the day. And what we're doing for the first time, and for the first time, I hope for a few weeks of doing this, is that what we're going to do is actually look at a specific market sector. So now that we've been through a couple of months worth of issues, and we've actually worked our way around the world with experts from right across the world. Today we're going to focus just on one area and just focus on F&B, just on food and beverage on top of that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to the panelists to introduce themselves to you, and I'm so happy that some people have agreed to come back for second helpings. It doesn't get better than that. Emma, good morning, welcome back.
Good morning, thank you for having me back.
For anybody who wasn't around when you were with us about a month ago, would you please introduce yourself?
Certainly. So Emma Loisel, I am co-founder of Volcano Coffee Works, a boutique roastery in London. I spent 20 years in London. I've returned to New Zealand 2.5 years ago. I still am very involved in that business at nights from New Zealand. Wasn't really the plan, but particularly through the COVID times, it's been even more necessary. I also sit on some boards here in New Zealand, Karma Drinks, NZGCP, and also KIA, the New Zealand Expert Association.
Oh, it's great to have you back, Emma. Thank you so much. And again, returning for a second time, Mr. Bob Burke, from all the way from the East Coast of the US. Good morning, or good afternoon, Bob.
Almost good evening, but thanks for having me back. I've been consulting now for about 23 years. Mostly around bringing natural, organic, and specialty products to market. So a lot around growth strategy, go-to-market, scaling, raising capital, building out your teams, things like that. Along the way, I've done a how-to guide reference book called the Natural Products Field Manual. I also put on seminars around sales and raising capital. And then I'm serving on some boards and advisory boards. And I've also been part of NZTE for quite a long time. So something like 8 years, 9 years of sort of doing workshops and one-on-ones in country. The last 3 years coming down as part of the Hirschberg Entrepreneurship Institute. And then stateside, being part of the NZTE Beachhead Advisors Program. So doing a lot of work over Zoom and one-on-one, but also when companies come up for the major trade shows, doing some in-person work with them.
It's great. It's like there's so much which we're going to talk about and share from your perspective over there, Bob. It's great to have you back. Welcome. For the first time, Paul Webster. Kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora. Yeah, Paul Webster from NZTE. I've worked reasonably extensively with F&B brands. I had 2 years at Google, and I had 9+ at Facebook, and the last 3 were at Instagram out of Singapore, working across all of APAC. So I'm here today to provide some sort of insights in terms of what's happening across F&B and exporters at NZT. Welcome to today's session.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's great to have you with us. Now I'm going to turn to another newbie on the panel today. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing? Yeah. Hi, I'm Tom. I'm one of the co-founders of Tom and Luke, and I'm also a health coach. So I'm probably the person with the least title, least amount of titles here presenting today and talking today. So just here to share some feedback and what we've been doing.
Oh, it's great to have you here today, Tom. Welcome. And just turning finally to Alistair, last but not least, welcome back to Alistair Gates from New Zealand Post. on who's currently on mute.
Still.
You're still on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
Nah, you're great. You're coming through.
You'd think third time I'd know what I'm doing.
You're a pro.
Thanks, Andy and Hamish, for inviting me back. I work for New Zealand Post. I work as a general manager of strategic relationships. My focus is on international, but having said that, so a good understanding of customs, the freight aspects of what's going on. But of course, all my international clients are facing the same domestic delivery issues, and also can talk a little bit about what's happening in the other industries as well. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. Great to have you back. We're delighted to have such a broad panel giving us insights over the next 45 or 50 minutes or so. Hamish, just before we get stuck into things, shall we share that poll?
Yeah. There we go. So kind of interesting. We've got a lot of people that have food products that are going direct to consumers there. We've got a few interested observers who aren't in necessarily food or beverage necessarily, but that is probably people have been coming along anyway. And I think it doesn't actually, while this is food and beverage focused, I think a lot of these principles are going to apply across any other category. And then we've got, this is interesting here, the 50-50 exporting or not exporting. So I think as we go through today, we certainly want to be paying attention to that in terms of, for those looking to get started exporting, what are some steps that they can be paying attention to. Anyway, so that's kind of an interesting result right there.
Okay. Well, and if anybody hasn't said hello on the chat, if you've just arrived, please jump on the chat and say hi to the panelists and let us know where you're from and how you're feeling. This is what it's all about. This is by exporters for exporters. So let's get on to the business of the day, Hamish. What do you think?
Absolutely. Fire away.
Good. Emma, can I start with you, please, with your perspective, and particularly important to hear from your role as a director of Kia. Compared to other sectors of our economy, the food and beverage business has been an essential service and has therefore fared in the short term perhaps slightly better than some other sectors such as manufacturing. Should we be counting ourselves as being in a fortunate position if we're in the F&B space?
It comes down to channels. So yes, if food and beverage has been an essential service, but obviously a lot of the wholesale market's been closed, with restaurants and cafes closed during this time. So it really comes down, I think, more to what were the channels that your brand had in place prior to lockdown, and what have you been able to pivot to during the lockdowns to enable you to weather the storm. If I look at our business in the UK, we had 95% of our business was a wholesale business, and we now realise we had plans to diversify, but there was nothing quite like a pandemic to accelerate those, seemingly. And it has shown us the value of diversification. We now see for the last couple of months, online has grown to 1,000% and is over 50% of our revenue from what used to be 2 or 3%. So holding that, it's that diversification. So I don't think you can look at it broadly across a whole industry. It's down to where brands were positioned before and how they've been able to cope throughout the pandemic.
That's a really good point. Paul, from an NZTE point of view, do you mirror Emma's thoughts on that? Is it individual, or do you think that F&B has weathered this better than everybody else?
I think it's been an amazing experience and kind of learning experience. And those businesses that have been open to learning, obviously being sensitive to coping to the now and the response and survival, but also those businesses thinking ahead a little bit. And we're very fortunate in New Zealand that we've got a lot of businesses right now that really are looking ahead and planning. I think overall there's 3 things that really resonate right now, and we do this overall at NZTE, but it's, market research. So right now, without stating the obvious, audience insights are probably more important than ever. Understanding your consumer, it could even be a B2B person, but in the FMCG space, they're using tools that are out there already, leaning on us a bit more for our networks, but using things like Google Trends, Facebook IQ. We heard from them this week on how to help exporters. Product market fit is essential. As panelists got together earlier, and we talk about basic things like getting your packaging right, getting your food testing right, having standards right, but product market fit in general. And then your business model. So Does it work right now? Will it work over the next few months? Some obvious things around there. We've had some great examples. For example, a honey company that was absolutely geared up for Amazon already. And then secondly, they were really geared up for e-commerce direct. This was almost the perfect storm for them. Massive demand. It came down to supply, leaning on things like air freight to get product to market. They're hiring digital people. So I don't want to labor on it too much. We're definitely seeing a big shift to people trying to catch up on digital channels, almost playing kind of catch up from 5 to 10 years, and planning to emerge stronger.
So it kind of feels as much about an opportunity to change as it does about either the positive and negative coming out of this.
Yes.
Bob, what's it like? The general feeling from conversations that we've been having over the last few weeks has been, for many companies who were exporting, it feels like they're just servicing their domestic markets at the present moment. Their focus has shifted to where the immediate opportunity is. Is that mirrored in what's happening over there in the US at the moment in F&B?
Are you referring to Kiwi companies in the States, or do you mean US companies and how they're thinking about global markets?
The US companies and their attitude to global markets at the moment.
Yeah, so right now, for the most part, there's been such a huge increase in demand. Most companies are struggling just to get product out the door, into the stores, on the shelves, for those selling retail products. And as Emma mentioned, any on-premise food service, that whole industry was hit so hard, really hard. Some of them are able to repurpose some of their products for sale into retail or club and do different case packs and things like that. But for the most part, the F&B companies that I'm involved with are primarily selling through e-com, i.e. Amazon and other e-com platforms, as well as bricks and mortar retail. And for the most part, most of the categories are booming, so unprecedented demand, and at the same time, relatively lower costs because they're unable to do things like in-store tastings or trade promotion and things like that. So it's been a bit of a windfall in some ways. And like I said, mainly keeping up. So not so much prioritizing export unless they're in a category that's down a bit and they're seeking out additional revenue. But most categories are up pretty strongly.
Now, you mentioned unprecedented demand and lower costs. It kind of feels like the perfect storm of happiness. Tom, from your perspective, what have you felt? Have you felt this increase in demand and this lowering of costs? And what's been your experience over the last 2 to 3 months?
Yeah, it's interesting. We sort of within the first couple of weeks, we definitely, from a New Zealand and Australia standpoint, we definitely saw a lot of stock go out the door. So we were kind of thinking, oh yeah, this could be a positive for us. Obviously, being a snack food company at a good price rate, for the consumer, you in the back of your head, you're kind of going, well, this is perfect opportunity for people who are going to need foods that are affordable and healthy. And but then within sort of 2 weeks after that, we realized that it was just more of a panic buy coming from the grocery buyers in the stores. And then as the consumer trends shifted, definitely our sales went right down here in New Zealand and across Australia as well. So we make changes on that. It's a bit of a shock, but it's gradually coming back. And obviously, as in New Zealand, as lockdowns decreasing and people are kind of getting back to normality, we're definitely starting to see sort of those patterns come back. But I think kind of for us, it's definitely, we went into this sort of with an understanding of who we thought our customer was, and this has kind of really proved it in terms of that, probably most of our products being a grab and go item at the supermarket shelves, at the supermarket checkouts. And so with checkouts being down regulated, people aren't making those decisions anymore. So it's really more the consumers going in for a once a week kind of shop and bulk buying for the family and really getting those essentials. So I think that word, essential, what are essentials, is obviously different. And to Emma's point earlier, if in terms of the channels that we're in, so we were just really fortunate to be in the supermarket channels. Obviously we saw drops in sort of the route trade customers as they all started closing down. So it's just fortunate that the supermarkets were there so that we were able to continue to run our business.
Yeah, that channel selection is so critical. Emma, you didn't have that luxury for your coffee business in the UK, because it was all predominantly into the trade. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you've experienced from a trading perspective, and what the reaction from the business has been, and where you're heading now?
So 95% of our business was, as I say, was wholesale or route business. We had started a grocery offering, and we just, in fact, during lockdown, that's helped us, because all of a sudden the buyers are at home and have more time to take calls. A year ago, we brought on board a new managing director who was out of grocery specifically to grow that channel, but of course all that work had to be done. We now have a listing starting in Ocado in the next month, and other supermarket conversations are really progressing at pace, which is great. We were in Holland and Barrett, which is a sort of a health food store in the UK. The challenge with that is they actually were not able to cope with demand. So although we went through there, it was like a 4-week delivery, which was ridiculous. We hadn't got our Amazon platform running properly. We hadn't brought in specialists to deal with that, which was a really big learning for us. But we had, in the last 8 months, invested in a new website. So we were ready for the demand to really pivot to online. And we pivoted very quickly with only a third of the team left in the house, because everyone else was put on furlough, which is a different system than in the UK to the New Zealand system. And it was amazing to see that within 2 months, we were able to meet what we thought was an 18-month e-com growth strategy. Now, yes, there's market trends absolutely riding, we were riding that wave, but it showed the change in focus of the team of, if we really, really narrowed down, we could really pivot fast. So we've now got the support we need for the business. So coming out of this, I think we will be in a better place. We will be a much more diversified business. But now the challenge is, the crisis is over, is now how to make sure we don't just pivot the channels, we actually really reinvent the business around those channels.
And given that the lockdown is being released in the UK in a somewhat relaxed and haphazard way, compared to the clarity we have in this country, how hard is it now to be able to plan on which channels to prioritise when you're not quite sure what freedoms people are going to have and what that's going to do for demand?
Incredibly difficult. We're the chaos in the UK, and the thing is, you can't really look at, it's a bit like the US. New York's a different beast compared to the rest of the US, as London's a different beast. So you're seeing only 24 infections a day, new infections a day in London, but you're seeing the growth. So it's almost a ripple effect out of the UK. Yeah. Out of London across the UK. So and there indeed is that you need data. I think when we caught up earlier, Tom, you mentioned reporting. We went from monthly reporting to daily reporting. We meet every morning. The team are together. We have a daily what's happened in the last 24 hours, and that level of rigor has really helped the business to be able to plan literally on a week by week basis going forward. Because if anyone knows, I'd love to have the spreadsheet, but in light of I haven't seen one, we've had to adjust our business to plan to work out how to adjust and just correct on the fly.
Yeah, and this is I think it's worth remembering that this is not just ourselves as producers and manufacturers, but it's actually everybody in the supply chain. And Bob, you've been speaking to retailers quite intently, haven't you, in the US over the last few weeks? Since they're the closest to consumers, what do those conversations tell us about the different dynamics that's coming through in terms of consumer demand and what it means for us as producers?
Yeah, so they are seeing a little bit of a subsiding of the early panic buying, pantry loading, just stocking up on essentials, migrating a little more towards more variety and a little more indulgence. The overall dynamic, which I'm sure has happened around the world, is fewer shopping trips on the part of the consumer, much bigger shopping baskets on each trip, more consumers shopping from a list as opposed to a lot of impulse and things like that. And as a result, for brands, a greater challenge around discovery of, how do you break in if you're a new brand where you don't have in-store tastings, trade promotion, things like that. And from a supplier standpoint, the big questions that a lot of brands have had were, how are retailers dealing with innovation? So Early on, the word was they put a pause on category reviews, looking at new items. They only wanted to keep the shelves full and just manage, that part of it. Mm-hmm. And now they're saying they're receptive to that, and they're putting the word out to suppliers on the best way to engage with them. So they're all doing virtual meetings over Zoom. Some of them are having samples sent to their homes. Some still have them go to the office, and they go there once a week. So just the mechanics of all that is starting to re-engage. Likewise, in the short term, they put a stop on promotions. So deals, promotions, discounts, and they're saying they're going to be looking for more of that going into the back half of the year. Unfortunately, we're probably looking at some kind of a recession. Hopefully it's not long, but I'm hearing everything from 6 months to 2 years. And so they're really pushing suppliers to be mindful about offering value. And value can be, getting back in the rhythm of promoting. It could be akin to everyday low price. It can be also thinking about value packs. So maybe larger pack size that on a per gram or per ounce basis is offering more value to the consumer. And then tell me when you want me to stop blathering on.
Obviously, I'll tell you. Don't worry.
But the thing that I'm fascinated by is just for a retailer, some of the most profitable areas of the store for them have been things like prepared foods, in-store bakery, and others, which have basically been shut down. And so a greater shift away from higher margin areas for them to relatively lower margin center store, canned goods, shelf-stable goods, ready-to-eat breakfast cereal, things like that. So they're definitely seeing increased revenue, but a margin shift as an operator.
So it's fair to say that we're going to be faced with the need to innovate to increase value over the coming months, because it's that we are in maybe a dramatic term, but we are heading, if not for recession, for depression in some markets as well. So that demand from retail is going to get larger and larger. Can we just turn to Alistair, please, for a second? Because Alistair, your industry in particular is a really good indicator of what's happening with consumer demands. It's like it's been maybe 3 weeks since you were on. Could you just give us an update, please, from a Indeed Post point of view? What's happening in your world, and what are you learning?
Exactly. So the last time I was on, I think we were still in Alert 4. So, of course, there was a massive lockdown, and so we weren't able to deliver all the product specs. So what we've seen is from Alert, when we moved to Alert 3 on April 27th, effectively, a lot of the courier companies, ourselves included, our business increased 50% volumes. Basically, we were having a Black Friday delivery day every day for 14 days straight. So, of course, there were backlogs in the business, but what are the things that we're delivering? Well, the home meal deliveries has been huge for New Zealand Post. So that was actually separated out, so it wasn't getting, because obviously it's a perishable type product. We're sending a lot of honey internationally. We've been volunteering as well as the management staff, and I was helping about 2 weeks ago. So I saw a lot of beverages going out, so wine and beer and this type of items. So what we're thinking is, how long will this bounce last for? So we're in Alert 2 now. Are people just buying offshore or buying because they don't want to go into retail? Will it last for the next 2 to 3 weeks, or will it be for the next 2 to 3 months? We're unsure, actually. But just to finish, I can tell you our imports are up again about 50%. I had a client contacting me this morning saying that their imports will increase even further. One of my clients is moving to ocean because they have so much air freight. And I guess just to finish, air freight has really come down in price. The government with NZT and Ministry of Transport have helped sponsor Emirates and Air New Zealand and other airlines. So we're seeing a lot more capacity out of New Zealand. And if you consider that the New Zealand dollar has decreased, exports will become more and more viable. But having said that, imports are also still growing phenomenally as well. So it's sort of almost win-win.
So it's like this kind of, it provides us with a bit of a challenge, doesn't it? So we're talking about we're kind of surviving by looking at our market as being domestic and growing again by making sure that we're servicing our overseas markets. Paul, from your perspective here, how do you strike that balance between keeping your eye on opportunities locally and making sure that you're putting enough time and effort into keeping your overseas markets alive and in a place of health for future growth?
Yes, it's obviously that balance, and I think some of the other panelists they checked in on that, and this knowing locally but also internationally when to shift that kind of focus from servicing the existing channels. And for some people, that's just been like emergency supply. Like some of my business is manufacturing even in China, exporting around the world. It's how do you maintain that supply, even raw materials. There's things like shortages of vitamin C, specific types of cloth, all kinds of stuff that are connected. But I was actually going to ask Bob, because I was really interested in the other folks. We heard initially everyone was paused on new business. They're on this hold. They've got to maintain now. New Zealand, obviously we're coming out of this. That doesn't mean our export markets are. So some of them are not ready to start talking about new. Some will be in the next coming months. And that's when it's actually quite positive, because they're saying, hey, we want to hear from you. Just not right now. We'll come back to you. But I was going to ask Bob too, how things are going with distributors, because those are really key in some of these export markets. I'd be interested in how they're holding up, particularly in places like the US.
So I think as every week goes by, the distributors are further along in terms of making up for whatever deficits were happening beforehand. And again, because they were caught flat-footed by this incredible surge in demand, they were really prioritizing essential items. So if you were a specialty food product, something a little out of sort of the mainstream in terms of a staple, those were getting deprioritized. They were a hard time getting on the trucks, getting out to the stores. So they were struggling for a while. But just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we had one of the big national distributors called KeHE Foods on a webinar that I moderated. And they said they're absolutely looking at new items right now. And they're eager to be, thinking ahead to the second half of the year. So really, as we go into June and July, looking to bring in new items. And so they're very interested, and the retailers have said the same thing. UNFI, which is one of the biggest natural national distributors and the primary supplier to Whole Foods, they're still probably a few weeks behind the rest in terms of looking at new items. Unless your new items have to do with hand sanitizer, sanitation wipes, or bathroom tissue, they're saying, wait a little further, wait a little longer.
But would it be fair to say, Emma, that the time to start thinking about that innovation is now, the time to get the insights to move on it? There's no point waiting for 6 months before you act. The buyer might not want to think about it until then, but we have to be acting right now, don't we?
Yeah, and actually, to echo Bob's point, we're seeing that in the UK. The supermarkets were saying they were actually limiting ranges, going to more essential services, essential products. They now come back and they're now looking for actually more premium products in some categories. So in our category of specialty coffee, they're seeing a 20% lift in that category. They need to increase basket value and margin, because all of the margins all of the margins in the more essential products is much lower. So they're looking at ways now how to bring in new brands that can help them refill that margin for them, in essence, in the basket value. So that's a positive. I think innovation it's absolutely critical to be doing it now, not just from a product point of view, but from a market point of view, to look at how can you capitalize on the changes, but also use your teams that may not be fully utilized at the moment, particularly the New Zealand-based ones. In the UK, we have a different problem because the furlough scheme is actually leaving people on the bench, something I've written to the Chancellor about, to say you need to revisit leaving 7.5 million people on the bench in your national need in crisis. Not such a clever plan, people. But in New Zealand, you've got a wage subsidy. So there are brands I know of here that have people that are now working on special projects, and this is the time to get them thinking and working across innovation and really looking at what's next, and getting their head out of the weeds and looking over to the horizon.
So, Tom, can you just take that from a practical point of view? The theme here is that diversification is going to be critical, not just in channels that we use, but also in the consumer needs that we choose to meet. I mean, you're in a very specialist space inside health and snacks, the convergence of two different categories coming together and making great traction. How are you thinking about your consumers in a different way, and how are you keeping on top of what's happening? And does that feed into new innovation? What's it like practically making that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for us, it's definitely, I think when we started out, obviously sort of being small town, local, you know, for us, it was very gut instinct led product development. And then as our business has grown and we've got new people in specialist roles, you know, we're looking a lot more at the data now. So a lot of our new MPD is definitely data driven, but we're still kind of we still always bring it back to what's our core, who are we, what is Tom and Luke, and what does it stand for, what are our values? And, you know, it's from that point of view that we look at the data, that we, you know, in terms of, I guess, sort of the flavor profiles and that sort of thing that turned out to be popular. Obviously different trends. I mean, we're already seeing, you know, there's a lot of that trend towards the health and immune boosting stuff. You know, you can sort of see data on what people are Googling. I think I looked on Amazon using one of their apps, and, you know, searches for vitamin D supplements, for example, have just gone through the roof in the last sort of week or so, which is relatively interesting considering a certain podcast that I heard with Rhonda Patrick. She was on with Joe Rogan. So, you know, it's this, you know, the public are really getting informed with what's actually good for them and how they can, you know, in lieu of a cure or whatever, how they can actually support their immune systems. And you know, I think that there's definitely that level of education coming out where we as a business have always kind of gone, well, we're nourishment for healthy lifestyles. So it's really around what's the education piece, you know, and so we're sort of doubling down on that MPD process. Again, by just focusing on who we are, what we stand for, what's the data saying, and where do we fit in with that. So it's really more about being proactive in our response to things, but we're always going to be who we are. You know, and we don't really want to be reactive and just following the headlines and following the trends of everything and using certain things just because that's trending, you know.
It does take it takes a huge amount of discipline to not be reactive in a time like this, and so we'll collectively take our hats off to you, because it's way easier said than done. Bob, it's like what we're hearing from Tom here is that there's a big jump in the awareness or the understanding of the education of consumers, and perhaps, you know, with people like shows like Joe Rogan actually talking about health out there, perhaps more frequently than they did before. This mainstream of awareness, is this flowing through into different consumer behaviors, or is it something which we should just be parking for the moment and not worrying about?
Well, again, you know, this is probably not a blinding insight, but given we're living through this pandemic, and sadly, the number of people that have been affected by it, illness or worse, or knowing somebody, there's such a greater awareness and appreciation about health in general. And so where we were all caught up in our daily lives and everybody's stressed and, you know, in front of our screens and living at a very fast pace, this is, you know, a major wake-up call for a lot of folks to really put health in perspective and how important it is and how other things really diminish in comparison. So what things can we control? What things are within our ability? And some of it is, you know, the quality of the foods and beverages and supplements and exercise and all the other things, meditation, things that we can do that promote wellness, and certainly products that call out immunity, you know, have been soaring, you know, as Tom said. And so I think people are really tuning into that, seeking them out. It's a little bit of self-care. It's a little bit, when there's so many things going on around us out of our control, it's something we have a little measure of control over. And so we're seeing, you know, increases in organic foods, non-GMO products that are still, you know, plant-based. Trends that were already happening are just being accelerated. So absolutely seeing that.
Great. I mean, it's like, so this is the issue with this, when we talk about human needs, which are so universal, the data set to try to make sense of it is so large. And Paul, I know you've been spending time with Facebook and Google over the last few weeks, just mining for ways to structure those insights. Are there any tips or any tools that have come through from those conversations that would be good to share?
Sure, yeah. So they've got a lot of tools that are available, you know, aside from doing like commissioning some specific market research that you can literally just do now. So, you know, one example Google gave was, you know, honey health benefits and trends on searches of that in the US. And you could literally see by state in the US where search trends had gone up dramatically. I'd echo what Bob's saying about organic. We're hearing that a lot internally, a lot increased demand for organic food, consciousness around food standards and food testing. I also look after assure quality. So they, right the way through, because they actually service China as well. So let's not forget China's taken off and they're demanding a lot of food. Some of the tools we looked at from Facebook and IQ, you can literally have a look, you know, within specific sectors, you know, whether it be food and beverage, health and beauty, and look, you know, by women in the US, what things have happened over the last few months and look at these changes. So I think as a starting point to get an idea of your audience or how that consumption might have changed, it's a really good thing to do. I saw a question pop up in the Q&A about local. So we know we're seeing this in New Zealand. I saw some results from a GWI survey that New Zealanders are now looking to, you know, shop, not just shop locally, but shop for local products. I'd be really interested to hear, obviously being sensitive that one of our big strengths on New Zealand is we've emerged from this and we're healthy, but do we expect that trend to happen in some of the domestic markets in terms of shopping for local products, and how much will this New Zealand green differentiation come out?
Open that question. Emma, would you like to respond?
You see, I see local slightly differently. I see local as a way in which consumers are choosing to support their local communities. And it comes back to brand story and purpose, and local was a piece of that. What we saw. So I think what's cutting through is the brand messaging of authentic brands that are more than just about profit. So you have brands that are an example would be, we were part of a BBC piece on the impact of specialty coffee in third world countries, and a lot of our coffee's growing, and you know, we would look at Colombia at that time. So it seemed as a national issue that all the coffee shops are closed, but actually it's a global issue from the impact on farmers. The mention of that, we had 400 orders that day, which 3 times the amount on our website from consumers going, we want to support Colombian farmers. And so I think, and we're a local Brixton company, but really our product, you know, all specialty coffee comes from offshore into the UK. So are we local offshore? So I think it can be, if brands just think we'll be able to, okay, because we'll survive locally. I think that in a little bit short term, people were looking for food close by. And we even set up delivery service from our closed cafe to just deliver food boxes to that into the NHS to help out, right? There's no margin in it for us. But I think brands, if you're going to look long term, you need to start thinking about, what are we actually communicating to our consumers? Have we got strong values, as Tom was talking about? Are we actually delivering our business? Volcano's purpose is to give everyone deserves a fair shot. And it's how do we now use that as a method of really driving our offering to our consumers and through our different channels. So I sort of say be careful of local. It could be seen as an immediate need. Longer term, it's about really what your brand story is and how you're demonstrating that.
Tom, what's your reflections on that? Because plainly you're a very down to earth, very authentic New Zealand brand. It's like, so how do you manage the challenge of local when you're moving? So I think you're in about 3 or 4 export markets at the present moment.
I can't keep up with how many markets we're in. Yeah. So I mean, I think the local thing, obviously everywhere you go around the world, like I think, you know, when you're in America, you know, people buy local. When you're in Australia, Australians want to buy Australian made, you know, Americans want to buy American made. New Zealanders want to buy Kiwi made. I think it's really around, obviously you've got to do what's right with your business. So in terms of your commercialization, you've got to look which market is going to be fitting with us, and is it right for us to start exporting. I think definitely on that local level, like we should be more supportive. I've got whole other issues that personally, that I believe around our whole markets and, farmers and, Paul was talking about organic and that sort of thing. If we can kind of keep it all close, that would be awesome. But at the same time, that's not realistically the world that we live in. We live in an interconnected world, right? There's people probably from all around the world that are watching this. And, as Emma was saying earlier, she's staying up all night to talk to people in the UK. So kind of we've sort of evolved to be able to now have options. But that doesn't mean that the options should come at the cost of good quality. But I think that it's really more around when you are buying local, you're buying local because you know who these people are. So for a lot of people, they want to buy local because they don't know the big brand company. There's no, it's that idea of, who's the person behind the curtain? Who are we giving the money to? So, but people buy stories, right? People buy the emotion. So I think if you're in a business where your story is true and you're remaining true to your story, I think that is local globally, because everywhere you go around the world, the local story is still the same. It's the startup, it's the, hey, we're doing this back for our community. It's, we employ our staff locally, we're supporting back for however you can. So it's people want to know, my feeling anyway, in my experience is that, people want to buy for what they believe in and buying the values effectively. So which again kind of comes back to what I was saying before about us and kind of just staying true to our core values and just getting really real on who we are and what we stand for, because there's people out there that stand for the same things and they're going to buy that.
I'm really encouraged that it's possible to be local and exporting at the same time. You can be local here and local over there. Bob, what this is putting into many of our minds right now is that is there a piece missing in our brand New Zealand when it comes to our produce? And your perspective is particularly valuable because you're from the outside looking in. Plainly, we're famous for quality and for being clean and green and everything else. But is there a part of that brand image now and that brand story that we should be adding in around what our food does or where it comes from or our people? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, so, as both Emma and Tom referred to, consumers are really hungry to know whose passion brought these products to market. Mm-hmm. So, for branded products, it's certainly what are their values, what was their inspiration, who are the real people behind this innovation, and it really helps serve as an emotional connection that will resonate with consumers, engenders loyalty, and ultimately builds value in the company. If you're talking about produce, are you referring to produce as in kiwi fruit and that kind of produce, or a broader, products production?
In broader terms, something which
good
made with our passion, not just out of our fields.
No, I think that all carries through, and I want to go back and tie that a little bit to the discussion on local, because local has a lot of dimensions to it, and some of it is the local economy, some of it is knowing who's producing it and the transparency in the supply chain back to a farm or back to a producer, an artisan or somebody like that. And for a while there, it also was that environmental sensibility, reducing food miles and carbon footprint and things like that. And having said that, there's still, I think, a ready market in the States for Kiwi companies and Kiwi brands, because, the values and the backstory and the quality are there. I think the brand New Zealand is very powerful and very positive in the States. I think there's a real affinity towards it, and why there's a lot of receptivity to companies coming from New Zealand. So I think it's an added element to that brand story. So, if you've got Tom and Luke and you have these guys who develop these great products, for health, wellness, convenience, clean ingredients, all those kinds of things, and they're coming from a cool place like New Zealand that has a very positive connotation around lifestyle and just physical beauty and environment and all that is going to be a real plus to the brand.
So this is, it feels like it's a time of opportunity again. It's a theme that's been coming through and relentlessly over the last few weeks. If there's, I know that about half the audience here may not have fully committed to export yet. The big hanging question here is this actually a time to act on that and to take your first steps, or to wait? Paul, what's your feeling on that?
Sure, yeah. So I think there was a really good theme coming out of there as well around this kind of focus on, and I love this, around your brand values and what's really meaningful. I love that. But focusing on obviously your key and core markets that you're doing well in, but also potentially this need to diversify because those markets might not be doing so well. And it's this real kind of like trade-off where we encourage at NZT you to have kind of fewer target, if not one target market, and more customer markets. I think that notion is true. But what we're seeing is, I gave the honey company example before. So they're doing super well in the US, but they've also got good business in Southeast Asia. And all of a sudden, there's this big interest in Middle East. Now, the Middle East is an interesting market. I'm just using this as a real example, where as long as they're balanced and focused, they can diversify. But they need help. So the demands out of those markets we're seeing from the supermarket buyers right now, who are even thinking about new stuff, they're super focused and maybe more focused on things like margin. They want to see that margin analysis, and Bob touched on this. That could become more important over time as budget strength, P&L becomes more of an issue. But I go back to the first things I said, like the market research piece is really important. Understanding your audience, understanding those consumer insights, being true to your brand, the product market fit, and having the right business model that I mentioned earlier on, if you're thinking about diversifying.
So once you've got that model and you've got that market fit, I mean, I just maybe turn to you, Hamish, on this one. Then it's like, if somebody wants to take a couple of first steps, then should they be looking towards somewhere that's more friendly to us and inside the bubble, potential bubble like Australia, or thinking wider afield? What's your advice from a direct to consumer perspective, mate?
So there are a number of practical things to actually consider, and Emma's point, look, hey, this is a good time to look at projects. And so, for example, if you're looking at going into the US, and a lot of what Bob's talking about is of interest, there are practical things like the FDA, and I see Kathy Lloyd here is on the call, and she's an expert in that. You need to be having your food coming from a FDA registered factory. You've got to have your labeling correct, and on all your packaging, you've got to get across the border. So there are these considerations here that actually take a little bit longer than you think if there are things to do. And even direct to consumer, if you're using e-commerce, be it your own website or a marketplace like Amazon, you've got to consider, is this, you might have a product that's a $7 product, but that isn't going to work through an e-commerce channel. So you've got to have a multi-pack. I know like with Tom, they've got a 6-pack of their products in a box, especially for it. So it's going to arrive, not being damaged, all of that. So you've got these considerations of how your product's going to turn up in that market. So, now's a really good time to be thinking about all of those steps, because that can take, 3 to 4 months just to work through all of that before you're ready to go. And so now the timing could be perfect for that as a Q4, could be where there's an upside. And then you look to Australia, where we've got the same food safety standards. So, and it is geographically nearer. You might even have some brand equity in those marketplaces where you could leverage off. And so even it might be that you're not ready for the Woolies or the Coles channel, but you could be. I was talking to a beverage company the other day, and where they've got some brand equity in Australia, so they'll have their own website. They'll get onto a marketplace like Amazon, which will give them some more visibility, maybe even eBay and Catch, and so they can go in from an e-commerce point of view to get a foothold in there. And it may be because they're more premium and their product might not work for other channels. So that's a really valid way, and arguably a faster way to get into a marketplace like Australia. And what Alistair was talking about with the freight, that's increasingly, the capacity into Australia is there. So it might be you make that step first, and then you look to other markets. And so, yes, there's some practical considerations to really look at.
There's a lot of practical considerations. One thing that you and I have heard in these calls over the last 9 weeks has been a change in the way that people are doing business. And I just want to turn to Emma just before we get into the questions here with one final question. just about the role of collective action when it comes to exporting, because we've been taught that we compete on our own. Pre-COVID, you compete, and like that's it. It's like us with the market, we go and do it. Whereas now, when buyers are thinking about their vendors differently, and we're thinking about our competition differently in our head and practically in our markets, collectivism might have a new place. How can we work more collectively as producers from New Zealand and try to get some bigger critical mass to help us get further faster?
Yeah, I know this has been one of my soapboxes from coming back to New Zealand. Is I'd go up to the UK, or did pre-COVID every quarter, and I'd always chuckle to think that if everyone stood up on the plane and was representing one product, half the plane would probably stand up. And I think New Zealand has to learn to collaborate better, and it's got to think of the global market and not through the lens of how small the New Zealand market is. But I see this collaboration on two fronts. One is companies just paying forward and working together. We have, Volcano Coffee Works, we've got friends of Volcano. We're promoting honey, the local providers in local, and we're sharing audiences. Really, it's good for all of us. But I have no idea how many sales I'm going to drive them or what they'll drive to us. So I think there's just a new world of taking risk of helping each other forward, and New Zealand acting together. I also think, and not to be controversial, but New Zealand has a very good image offshore of clean green, but actually New Zealand isn't as clean green as we really show it is offshore. We have one of the highest per capita of waste produced per person. We have a dead zone in our waters. There's only 5 in the world, and one of them's in our. So I think if New Zealand needs to actually live its own brand and really start. This is a time to reset and think, how do we actually live our brand of clean green? How do we make sure we restart our economy in a green way? And while someone asked me on the chat what I think the government should be doing, it should be helping companies go carbon zero neutral. It should be supporting companies to become B Corps. This to me is what would change. We really mean New Zealand lived up to what our image is and what the real potential in the market is to hold the land of we're a team of 5 million. We are a clean, green place. It's a great place to visit, but it's an incredible place for businesses to innovate and for people to really grow their careers and their businesses.
And I guess the great thing about the audience on the call today is that we all have the opportunity to do that, because we're reacting
ourselves. We can do it. We can actually go, right, we're going to think every decision, business decision we make, are we living the values of our brand and of the New Zealand brand?
That's wonderful. I think we're just watching the clock here, and Hamish's eyes as well. The two things I need to keep my eyes on here, because his eyebrows tell me when it's time to move to some questions. Mr. Conway, your eyebrows have been talking to me. Shall we take some questions from the floor, mate?
Yeah, good. And so just before we do that, I do just want to remind people here, like I know at the top of the hour we're technically stopping, but we are going to do the after party again as well. So that will be an opportunity. If you've got more specific questions, we'll bring people on as panelists. If you have to go, understand that. But if you want to stick around and get maybe some more specific answers to your questions off the record, we'll stop the recording. Please hang around, and same again with the panelists. If you can, great. If you have to go, no problem. So I just wanted to bring that up. I'm also just going to quickly do the confidence poll, and then I'm going to launch that. And then if people could answer that while we simultaneously get into a question. Okay, so this poll we run each week, and want to see, compared to last week, where are you at? More confident, same, or less confident? So while that's running, we've got here from James McGeorge. So thanks, all really interesting so far. Read some of Bob's retail comments. Have you noticed a shift or trend of consumers to buy small treats as well as mostly value? So while people aren't buying the holiday house, but are they treating themselves? Are you seeing that trend?
I almost feel if I answer in the affirmative, it's like a pat answer. In other words, the popular wisdom, with all the shortcomings of popular wisdom, is that people are quarantined. They're going to want indulgent products. They're going to want artisanal ice cream, confection, chocolate, all those kinds of things, but haven't really seen the lift yet in those categories. So at least today, very likely 2 weeks from now, a month from now, I would say that would be true. But I think for now, we haven't seen that. When you look at the categories that are booming, Baking at home is absolutely exploded. So anything to do with baking is through the roof. And you could say that's indulgent, but the individual chocolate bar, snacking chocolate, baked good, things like that hasn't seen, meaning ready to eat, has not seen that same lift yet.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. So that's good. That's good. Thanks for that. And then we've got another one here, which is kind of interesting at looking at the demographics, and Robin from Tamco, which actually, by the way, Tamarello relish is fantastic. Anyway, so I was looking at saying an assumption here going, that people under 40 seem to be more concerned with their financial situation, and those 40 plus more focused on health. Is there an opportunity here to market health products to that 40 plus demographic? I was going to say older demographic, but I'm in that. I'm not sure if I'm right. Anyway, is that more important than before, or is there? How would you go about targeting that demographic with health products? Is it who's got a thought on that? Might be back in Bob's court.
I think health products across the board, there's a huge amount of interest in. And, so as I said earlier, products that are intrinsically healthy, i.e. nutritional, clean ingredients, organic, boost your immune system, gut health, these have been going on for a while as popular trends, and now just been amplified as we go through this pandemic. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, though. I'd say intrinsically healthy products have been on trend for quite a while, and now more so. Yeah. But I don't know if I agree that, you have to be over 40 to have a greater interest in health than economy. Millennials, Gen Z, all these consumer segments are interested in clean ingredients, healthy products, organic foods, natural products, free from either allergens as well as synthetic ingredients and so on. So I think that's really a macro trend across the board.
Which is safe to say that we should have a greater national advantage than anybody else for those different sets of attributes. Anyway, so it's kind of even more reason to get back to understand who our customers are and make sure we give them more of what we do better than anybody else. That's where the growth is. Hamish, we're right on top of the hour, so we might just pause the other questions if people want to come into us into the after party, so we can the formal part of today. As per ever on this, it's like I'm just always keen to leave things on a note of growth and optimism. So we're going to ask everybody just in the last 2 minutes, just for a reason to be cheerful. Alistair, you've given us lots of reasons to be cheerful in terms of supply chain. This week, give us another. Give us a reason to be happy.
Oh no, I just think now that in New Zealand we're back to alert 2. I'm in the office. I've been in the office for the last week. I think the past 8 weeks has been great, but it's great to be with your colleagues. We've been a lot more closer to the operations. Actually, as I said, we've actually been physically moving parcels. So, from teamwork perspective, we're looking forward to the next couple of important months.
Wonderful. Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for joining us. Paul, reason to be cheerful?
Being on this call with amazing insights from the panel. I say that not to be too funny. Like, one of the best things that's come out of this, I think, is there's been some really amazing peer-to-peer type work and just people really open to learn. And it's kind of accelerated what was happening. We've kind of jumped ahead in some respects, another 5-10 years. So I just think this, amazing period for learning, not only about resilience, but how to emerge stronger.
Yeah, keep sharing. Thanks, Paul. Lovely to have you. Emma, reason to be cheerful?
I think out of any reset comes the opportunity to do things differently. And if the last 9 weeks has proved to us that we thought there were really hard things that couldn't change, and they can change really, really fast. And consumers have an enormous power to change. So if the consumers I think that time at home has given them a chance to say, it's about better. I want better products and better services. And I think that gives us a real opportunity nationally and globally to actually reset and do things quite differently.
Yeah, that's lovely insight. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for joining us. Tom, a reason to be cheerful?
Look, I think I echo sort of Emma's points. I think in sort of the conversations and topics that I cover sort of as a health coach and with the community that I have there, and obviously on Facebook, like, I mean, we're definitely seeing Zimmer's point on, you know, sort of the businesses changing, but I think on an internal level, there's a lot of people that are, you know, they've taken this opportunity to really journey inwards, you know, and some comments that I've had from some friends of mine that, you know, they're looking at themselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically as well. And I think, you know, the company's ability to work from home, like I've got a friend who's a lawyer, and, you know, I mean, you know, we all know how hard lawyers work, but he's been able to work from home. And this whole shift has allowed him, he's got a young family, has allowed him to still continue to do his job, but he doesn't have the stress of not being around for his kids anymore. And I think moving to the future, I think there's just this whole shift to online and how we can actually utilize tools like this with Zoom, with webinars. I mean, I think we're just going to see people start to shift their thinking from this rigid 9-to-5 workday into actually I can do my job and I can do this. It's not either or, it's this and. So I think that's a really positive thing.
It's healthy lives. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom. It's been great having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, Bob, you have the last word, sir.
Well, spring is coming stateside, and that's a reason to be joyful. And I'll try not to repeat what was said, but I think there were a lot of great comments. And for myself, where humbly, modestly think of myself as a lifelong learner, to be in the thick of things as the world is evolving in real time before us, and lots of opportunities to adapt and change and rethink the ways we've done things for a long time, and where are the opportunities as we begin to come out of this. I just find absolutely fascinating, and I'm you know, hungry to learn as much as I can and be as much a part of it as possible, because it's an amazing time in one's life and experience to be going through such a massive change like this. Yes,
extraordinary change indeed. Bob, thank you so much again for joining us all the way from the East Coast of the US. So it's time to wrap things up from here. We are going to be back next week, Hamish, I do believe.
Yes, we are. Next week with a focus on technology and e-commerce as well. So that'll be, you know, again,
it will be.
But fantastic. Look forward to that. And obviously the poll results there. So we've got nearly half the audience is more confident this week in terms of what we're moving towards. 42% same and 10% less. So encouraging, and certainly, you know, again, it's about doing the things that we can control inside of our businesses. So thank you everyone for being here, and much appreciated. And we'll stay on this back channel for the for some more deeper Q&A for people that have that. We've got Christopher Boys will be coming in on that as well. So great, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it.
We'll be back 10 o'clock at the same time next week. Watch out across the social channels and in your inbox for what's actually happening. But for the present moment, just on behalf of Bob and Tom and Paul, Emma and Alistair, just a big thank you so much for joining us, because it's like without you, there'll be no one to talk with. So please do feel free to join us now. And if not, we'll see you 10 o'clock next week. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.